So, now there's, when I was in government, you used to think that you got like little perks of things. You actually didn't really get too much when you were in government, in the way of perks. And when I took this job, I thought, well, I worked in government, so I'm accustomed to, pretty much having like the most inexpensive of everything and recycling paper. But today, I'm actually invoking my powers as executive director to introduce the person who's going to introduce our keynote speaker. I grew up in Flatbush and in Brooklyn, and when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, my father never watched baseball again. And he turned his entire sports mania to the New York Giants. So in my house, in our kitchen, we had a picture of Mayor LaGuardia, the Pope, and Sam Huff. And I actually still have a picture of Sam Huff in my house. No more the Pope or LaGuardia, but so I wasn't going to pass this chance up. Football is very obsessed with statistics, and I really, I have sort of like short-term brain problems, so I can't really remember too many. But there's a few Tiki Barber statistics that are really worth mentioning. One is that he led the Giants in rushing in every game for 80 games in a row. I mean, like, who could do that? I mean, it's just incredible. And last night when I was talking to my husband, a long-suffering Giants fan, and he was, going through all these different statistics, he said, what is the coolest thing about Tiki Barber? He said, they told him he was too small, they told him he couldn't play, they told him he could only have a part-time spot, and he proved them all wrong. And that really is the coolest thing about Tiki Barber, other than the fact that he's here with us today at our CHPC Luncheon. Thank you. Thank you.
That kiss was for your suffering. We went to a Super Bowl once. We got our butt kicked, but we went. Thank you for having me here today. I'm sure some of you guys are asking what I, former athlete turned broadcaster, am doing here today, introducing Cory Booker. And I met Cory about 5 or 6 years ago, and he was a fledgling politician then, coming up through the ranks. But I was impressed about the kind of person that he was. In my new job at the Today Show, I've got to do some very cool things. I went and covered the tragedy down at Virginia Tech. I have interviewed some very interesting people. But the most fascinating one so far has been going to South Africa and looking into that country for where in the world is Matt Lauer. We did a piece on the townships there. And 15 years after apartheid, they're trying to improve the housing. You go into some of these shanty towns where it's all tin and wood, scraps of things that are put together to put these people's houses and give them a roof over their head. And to me, it was depressing. I walked into that area and said, how can people live here? But when you looked at the faces of the people who lived there, they saw that change was coming. The government of South Africa is working to get rid of that informal housing and get them into places where they can live. And so on their faces, they have hope. I reconnected with Cory Booker about 2 months ago at National Law Enforcement Foundation dinner, or luncheon, and he got up and spoke. And what I got from him about the city of Newark is that even though they haven't been given a chance in a lot of ways, a lot of people write it off because of the violence, because of some of the crime that has existed there. Cory Booker had hope, and he had a passion about that hope. And as a football player who lives by cliches, I realize that if you don't have the passion, you don't have the desire, you don't have the belief, you won't get it done. Well, Cory Booker has all of that, and I have great hope. And I think a lot of people in this room and across this state and the state that's next door believe that there's hope, and Cory Booker's going to find a way to get it done. Cory.
just in case you were wondering, besides the fact that Tiki, Barber, and I look so much alike, people mistake me for him all the time. They said the same thing about me. They said I was too small. They also told me I was too slow. They said I didn't have the skill set. But the difference between Tiki and I, me was right. But it's great to be here to share with you a little bit of the spirit that is abundant in this room. And I know a lot of the people as I look at the organizations above there and how involved you are, how dedicated you are, how passionate you are, and how transformative you are in your collective work. And if I could just maybe for a few brief moments share with you my gratitude through some stories about my experiences now and knowing that we resonate in many ways with those same values and with those same ideals. I started in housing work. You know, my professional career in many ways was begun at Yale Law School, working in a housing clinic, trying to represent tenants that could not necessarily afford to stay in their homes or being evicted for one reason or another. And I got to Newark with the same passion. I ended up working for the Urban Justice Center and began organizing as quickly as I could. But I was immediately confronted with a reality in my streets. When I first moved there, I had this dream for myself that I would move onto the worst street in Newark. And I had listened to some jokes by Chris Rock who said, you know, why is it the most violent street in every city? It's named after the man that stood for nonviolence. And I moved onto the south end of Martin Luther King Boulevard in Newark, New Jersey. And I was still a law student at the time, and I had worked everywhere from East Harlem to East Palo Alto on youth issues and housing issues, and I was just overcome by what I saw. My first month there, I saw a pharmaceutical trade that could put Merck and Johnson & Johnson to shame. In my first month there, I saw my first shooting ever. My first month there, I literally found a body bludgeoned to death on my street corner. I used to watch from the back of a one-room that I rented in a home for recovering drug addicts. But ironically, I used to look out the back window and see people huddling in the back, black people, white people, wealthy people, poor people, sharing IV needles and shooting up their drugs that they bought on the way to work. And I'll never forget my first month there. I was walking down the street, and these people that ran that street-level drug trade, and right in front of the projects and some of the other dilapidated housing in the neighborhood, one of those guys jumped off his perch and threatened my life. He said, if you ever so much as look at me again or walk down this side of the street, I'm going to bust a cap in your posterior region. And I look at this guy, and you have to understand that, you know, I'm a former, you know, college football player who could have gone to the pros if I wanted to. But I looked at this guy who was stepping at me, and I said, okay, just don't hurt me. and I walked away really quickly. And this is the truth. His nickname on the street was T-Bone, and I'm a vegetarian, so that was particularly scary for me. But I met this amazing woman who was the tenant president since 1969, the year I was born, in these high-rise public housing projects. And her name was Virginia Jones. And I went up to her and told her, you know, my name is Cory Booker. I want to help you out here. I'm from Yale Law School. I'm about to graduate, become a lawyer. I really want to help. And she looked at me strangely, and I'll never forget the words that she said to me. And she said to me, you want to help me? First, you got to tell me what you see around here. And I looked around the neighborhood, and I said, well, I see a crack house. I said, I see drug dealers, which I said in a low and respectful tone, and just sort of described the neighborhood, everything I saw. And she said, well, you could never help me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, boy, you need to understand something, that the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those people who sees hope, opportunity, possibilities, if you see love or the face of God, then you can be somebody that makes a change. And so I'm standing in front of a room right now where people don't see life as it is. They more see how it must be. But not only that, they bring the tools, the passion, the dedication, the technical expertise together necessary to make those transformations. In Newark, on that street, I began to believe in a deeper, more passionate way because I saw local residents pull together with lawyers and with government agents, with private sector, with nonprofits, and really in a very short period of time transform that neighborhood. Got the slumlord convicted in federal court, got some of the dilapidated homes torn down, the crack house torn down, got Prudential to adopt the local school. Amazing things began to happen in that neighborhood because of people coming together. I eventually got involved in politics and began to realize that change can be expedited if you can create this kind of concert. There's a wonderful song that they call the Black National Anthem, written by James Weldon Johnson. It says, lift every voice and sing. And we now realize in Newark that if we can get every voice singing, not in a cacophony of and jangling discords of disunity, but in a unified chorus, we can begin to achieve great things. But it always starts, as Ms. Jones say, by coming together around a common vision of what you see. When I got elected mayor, the first thing we did is we walked in and said, let's pull together people for a common vision. We call it a plan for our city, because we saw development being done in ways that did nothing but undermine the best interests of the public, with parks and green spaces not being paid attention to, homes being built where they shouldn't be, no paying attention to our environment whatsoever, driven mostly by avarice and greed as people made quick deals. We came in and brought the RPA in and began to establish what our values were as a community and how can we start doing things about it. We looked at even our own government offices inside City Hall. None of them were working together, from production to enforcement. Nobody was talking to each other, split unity, and nothing was getting accomplished on the inside, literally leaving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of possible government grants and government funding on the table, often being called back by the federal government. We began to realize we had to come to table with a larger vision for who we are and a plan to get it together. And we've now started reaching out to partners from the RPA, from LISC, for Enterprise Community Partners, the Housing Partnership, Community Preservation Corporation, Fannie Mae, the Redevelopment Fund, and so many local groups to begin to use our common effort to make a substantive, significant change. We've started changing our policies inside and starting to use the leverage the city has to actually produce results. Our tax abatement policy, tying it to specific returns from developers, whether it's making commitments to do housing for low-income people, making sure we're integrating that and making sure we're looking at green building, make sure we're looking at even involving prisoner reentry and helping get more jobs for people within our community. We're looking at ways of leveraging other assets that we have as a city, from our housing subsidy policies to our land disposition policies, about how we're using city land to incentivize people to do the right thing, unlike in the past, just giving it away to developers who had political connections. We are trying to make sure that in Newark, a city that is rapidly changing, after years of losing continuous population, we're now looking to be a city that's gaining population. Since the last census in 2000, we've gained over 10,000 people into our city. As we see our new downtown developers coming in to speculate, we have a wonderful new project called 1180 Raymond Boulevard, where 80% of the new housing applicants actually are coming from New York City. And if anybody here would like to pick up an application, we have them at the back of the room. You see people coming into Newark, discovering the possibilities and discovering that there's value there. We were just out talking to national retailers who seemed to drool when we started to tell them that our city has wealth in it. In fact, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars, over $500 million annually, in retail opportunities outside of our city, because we don't have the many of the retailers that should be in Newark that are not. We're beginning to sell our city, but we realize that growth for growth's sake is not what we want. We want equitable growth. We want everybody to be at the table. We want to make sure that everyone is included. We cannot have a Newark that just moves out the indigenous population as people begin to rediscover opportunity. We're looking about a way to use housing policy to generate our city's real recovery. And this, to me, is what it's all about. There's an old saying, you never forget the people that brought you to the dance. And when I was a young man thinking about running for office, I had to go around the entire Central Ward. I had somebody tell me that there's no way you're going to win this election. As a kid that didn't grow up in the city of Newark, you have to talk to every single resident, one of my best advisors said. And said to me very pointedly that there's an old saying that says, who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear what you say. And so I sat at tables, knocked on doors, talking to people. One of the first people I met was in a very tough neighborhood, dilapidated housing lining streets around a school in an old abandoned park that really wasn't used for anything except for nefarious means, nefarious objectives. And I met this woman whose name is Judy Diggs. I didn't know at that time that she was famous, if not infamous, in her community. She was a very large woman without all her teeth in her mouth. Her home was filled with kids. She must have had a constant dorm going on with her children, her grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. She literally was holding together that community by housing half of it themselves. This was a woman that had such an artful use of language. I never saw a person that used in every sentence, instead of punctuation marks, she used curse words. She'd say, "Get on in here!" Exclamation point. And she sat there and MF'd me as I sat her on the door. I couldn't figure out if she was going to support me or not, just cussing me up and down the table, telling me what was going on about no good politicians and how dare I come to her house. Who are you? What's your job? You're a lawyer. I don't trust those lawyers. What do you want here? And she told me about her vision for her neighborhood. Eventually, somehow, miraculously, I convinced her to support me, even though at the very last minute, the mayor of the city of Newark, who discovered I had a chance of winning, called her into her office. She said he set up tea and crumpets and had all more food. She said she ate everything he put in front of her. And he said, pulled out a big roll of $100 bills. And she said, Cory, he peeled that MF, pulled off a $100 bill, put it in front of me. I can't believe that MF wants to think he could buy me. I couldn't believe it, Cory. I want you to know I'm still loyal to you, Cory. I still support you. I took that $100. But I'm still with you, Cory. I spent it real quick, too. Here was a woman that would chase down drug dealers, kick people off our streets, would cuss kids out, adults out, but she was always saying that her neighborhood that she had lived in for decades was going to come back. She got burned out of her home. All these children that she was providing for had no place to go. The community rallied together to try to help her out. We found housing for her, but she was not willing to accept it because it was miles away from her neighborhood that she said she was going to stay there and fight. And we eventually were able to find her some housing that I didn't necessarily think was good to live in, but she was there. And then before I knew it, I came back and there she had another 25, 30 kids seemed to be living in that neighborhood that she was taking care of. We tried to find her support, but slowly, amazingly, as the politics in the city started to change, people began to buy into her vision. Before you know it, you had state agencies and local agencies. You had local nonprofits, some of whom are in this room, that sat down with her and began to buy into her vision. Next thing you know, we were getting the dilapidated homes torn down. And to this day, right now, we have in the state of New Jersey, in what was one of the toughest neighborhoods, one of the first environmentally friendly, low-income and moderate-income housing in the state of New Jersey. It has solar panels on the roof. It was built without toxic materials. It was built to maximize the shade and the cooling, an amazing facility. On the ribbon cutting, it was packed. It seemed like everybody from Ms. Diggs' house came there. But more than that, it was hundreds of people in the neighborhood. People had tears in their eyes to see that this kind of housing could be built in a neighborhood. And as we're trying to do in the city of Newark, we were linking not only to the housing completed project, working with unions and people like Youth Build to make sure that people in the neighborhood are actually building projects like this. Now, I tell you, it has an interesting ending because Ms. Diggs was very much there, but physically she was not. You see, she died before this project was completed. I'll never forget how she died. She died with class. She was in a classroom, an after-school program, holding court over about 60 or 70 kids. And I don't know what she was screaming about, but some people told me she was punctuating her words, maybe not like she shouldn't, but she was talking to those kids about the community, about what they had to do. And she had a heart attack and died right there. Now, I am a big believer in America. I love this country. If it wasn't for the sacrifices of those before me, I would not be here at this moment. But the reality is, a fight for our country is continuing. It fights in inner cities all over this nation. People who still thirst and yearn for this American dream. Langston Hughes said it very clearly. He said, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. All over Newark right now, there are people like Miss Judy Diggs, who've never put on a uniform or never called to go overseas to fight for this nation. But they stand in communities, on blocks, in neighborhoods, fighting a more noble fight in many ways than I have ever fought in my life. They stand up for this country because they still have a dream and vision that is unfulfilled. They stand up for this nation with all their energy, with all their passion, and most importantly, with all of their love, insisting and demanding that cities don't gentrify and forget the people who've sustained them for so many years. They keep demanding that we don't forget about those people that we try to ignore almost every single day. Demanding that the vaunted principles that we stand up and say, that I saw Ms. Diggs stand up and say countless times, leading a chorus of children, that we are one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That people like her are demanding that we live up to these aspirational words, bring texture and meaning to them. The city of Newark now, we are trying to create that kind of model. We are trying to use housing to energize the right kind of revolution in our country. We are trying to live up to the kind of work and passion that you have, but most importantly, we are trying to live up to the dignity and the grace and the courage of people like Miss Judy Diggs. Thank you for being a part of this effort.